All right, today we're diving into a really volatile moment in history, the Roman province of Judea, right around the time of Emperor Nero. This was a place just simmering on the edge of a massive war. And our guide for this is the historian Josephus, who actually lived through it all and gave us this incredible first-hand account of how a whole society can just completely unravel.
Okay, so before we get into the action, we gotta know who's who. First, you've got the Emperor Nero calling the shots from Rome. In Judea, his main guy is the governor, or procurator, a man named Felix. Then there's Agrippa II, who's a local king, part of that famous Herodian dynasty. And on the ground, you have the established Jewish leadership, like the high priest Jonathan. But, and this is key, you've also got these radical new groups popping up, like the Sicarii, who are basically assassins, and these charismatic religious figures, like the so-called Egyptian prophet. The clashes between all these people are what's going to drive this whole story. Now, here's the thing you have to understand. Judea didn't just wake up one day and decide to rebel. Josephus shows us a place that was already dealing with a ton of different problems all at once. It was like a pressure cooker, and the lid was about to fly off. So let's set the scene. For a long time, the background noise in Judea was just constant banditry. It was a huge problem, and the Roman governor, Felix, decided he was going to be the one to finally deal with it. And you know what? At first, it looked like he was succeeding. He actually managed to capture this really notorious bandit leader, Eleazar, who'd been terrorizing the countryside for 20 years. Felix rounded him and his crew up and shipped them off to Rome. So on the surface, it might have looked like order was being restored. But really, all it did was clear the way for something much, much worse. Because with those old-school bandits out of the picture, a totally new kind of violence just exploded onto the scene. And this wasn't happening out in the countryside anymore. No, this was a new terror, and it was taking place right in the heart of Jerusalem. They were called the Sicarii. The name comes from Sica, which is a small curved dagger. So these were literally the dagger men. And they weren't just thieves, they were hyper-nationalist assassins. And their goal was to take out anyone they saw as an enemy or a Roman collaborator, right out in public. And their method was just chilling. They'd wait for these big, crowded festivals where they could just disappear into the masses. With their daggers hidden under their clothes, they'd get right up next to their target, stab them, and then, this is the crazy part, they'd be the first to cry out in shock and horror, totally blending in with the terrified crowd. It was almost impossible to catch them. This was pure psychological warfare. And they didn't start small. For their very first public hit, they went straight to the top. They assassinated Jonathan, the high priest. Can you imagine the message that sent? If the most powerful religious figure in the land could be killed in broad daylight, then nobody was safe. And after that, Josephus says it became a daily thing. And this quote from Josephus just nails it. He says the fear itself became worse than the actual killings. Think about that. You're living in a city where you can't trust anyone. Your neighbor, the guy you pass on the street, anyone could be an assassin. The paranoia was completely tearing the city apart from the inside. But the Sicarii weren't the only ones shaking things up. At the very same time, a completely different kind of movement was gaining steam, one that mixed intense religious belief with revolutionary politics. So you had these really charismatic prophets pop up, claiming they had a direct line to God. They told the people that liberation was at hand, that God would give them a sign to throw off Roman rule. They drew massive crowds out into the wilderness. And Felix, the governor, saw this for exactly what it was. This wasn't just a prayer meeting. This was the beginning of a full-blown revolt. And the biggest of them all was a man Josephus just calls an Egyptian. And look at this number. He got 30,000 people to follow him. I mean, this was no fringe group. This was a mass movement, and it was a serious threat to Roman power. So here's how it went down. This prophet leads his 30,000 followers to the Mount of Olives, just outside Jerusalem. His plan? He tells them he's going to make the city walls crumble so they can march in and take over the Roman garrison. Just unbelievably bold. But Felix wasn't about to let that happen. He sent his army out to meet them, and the rebellion was absolutely crushed. The prophet himself managed to get away, but pretty much his entire movement was wiped out. Okay, so we've got urban assassins and religious rebels. But the chaos didn't stop there. It also turned inward, with communities turning on each other. And the flashpoint for this was the city of Caesarea. The fight here was all about identity. The Jewish residents said, hey, our king, Herod, built this city, so it belongs to us.
But the Syrian or Grecian population fired back, "Yeah, but he filled it with pagan temples and statues. He clearly didn't build it for you." There was just no middle ground. It was a fundamental clash over who the city was for. And the whole situation was a powder keg. On one side, the Jewish population was generally richer and had more people. But, and this is a big but, the Syrian population had a major ace up their sleeve. The Roman soldiers stationed in the city were mostly Syrians themselves, so they naturally took their side. Both factions thought they had an advantage, which is a perfect recipe for conflict. So when riots finally exploded, Felix stepped in. But he didn't play the part of a neutral peacekeeper, not at all. He basically unleashed his soldiers on the Jewish rioters, killing a ton of them and letting their homes be looted. Sure, he stopped the fighting, but he did it by brutally taking one side.
And that just makes you think, right? When the people in charge use that kind of force, does it actually calm things down? Or does it just throw gasoline on the fire, convincing one side that the whole system is rigged against them and making things even worse? So we've seen all these different threads, the assassins, the prophets, the riots. Let's step back for a second and look at how it all comes together to paint a picture of a province that has really passed the point of no return. And this is the most important thing to get. It wasn't just one crisis. It was a perfect storm. You had the Sicarii spreading terror in Jerusalem. You had religious zealots leading revolts out in the desert. You had new groups of bandits popping up and burning villages. And you had these violent ethnic riots in the major cities. Every single part of society was on fire at the same time. And Josephus just wraps it all up for us here. He says that the flame of rebellion was being fanned from every direction, getting bigger and hotter every single day, until it finally erupted into a full-scale war. At this point, there was no turning back. So, looking at this whole tragic sequence of events, you're left with this one big, unsettling question. We've seen all the fuel being piled up, the political hatred, the social fear, the religious extremism. It really makes you wonder, when a society gets this broken, what does that final spark look like? What's the one thing that finally pushes it over the edge from chaos into all-out war?